Golden screens once shimmered with the faces of legends. Their smiles were painted in gold, their gestures immortalized in silver light. To audiences around the world, Hollywood's golden age seemed untouchable, a cathedral of beauty where art and glamour danced hand in hand. But behind the curtains and echoing applause, shadows grew longer. There were whispers in the hallways of studios, screams muffled behind locked doors, and contracts signed not with dreams, but with fear. Tony Curtis, himself a child of this dream factory, knew both sides of the stage. He had lived through the intoxicating highs of stardom, basking in the glow of audiences who adored him. Yet he had also seen the darker engines of power, where directors treated actors like pawns and creativity became a mask for cruelty. His words, spoken decades later, peeled back the glittering skin of Hollywood to reveal its bones. "Their movies made history," he said once, "but their hands left scars no camera could capture." It was a confession, and perhaps a warning. For every beloved epic and award-winning classic, there was an untold cost, trauma buried beneath the applause, reputations shattered in silence. Curtis wasn't alone in his outrage. Journalists from the era hinted at the violence behind closed doors, stories smothered before print. And fans who once cheered at premieres later wondered if the heroes they admired were built on the suffering of others. Some say you can still feel it, the eerie weight of those concealed truths hanging over the very studios that gave us cinematic immortality. And in his reckoning, Curtis named 10 men whose power twisted the dream into something darker. He called them ruthless, not because of the art they made, but because of the lives they broke. Each name carried a paradox, revered as artists, reviled in whispers. These were no longer roles from a script, but crimes that Hollywood had concealed for decades. And in the list, Tony Curtis named 10 ruthless directors who shattered Hollywood's golden age. The final name is sure to send a chill down your spine. Billy Wilder, the visionary tyrant of Some Like It Hot. In 1959, Some Like It Hot exploded onto American screens like a champagne bottle uncorked at midnight. Directed by Billy Wilder, it remains one of Hollywood's greatest comedies, ranked by the American Film Institute as the single funniest film of all time. Audiences adored its slapstick rhythm, its daring gender-bending premise, and above all, its luminous star power, Marilyn Monroe, Jack Lemmon, and Tony Curtis. On screen, everything sparkled with effortless joy. Off-screen, however, the set was anything but light-hearted. Wilder, a refugee from Nazi Germany, had earned a reputation in Hollywood as one of its sharpest minds. His dialogue was like a scalpel. His films, Double Indemnity, Sunset Boulevard, The 7-Year Itch, were hailed as masterpieces of cynicism and wit. To the world, he was a genius. To those under his direction, he was also something else, a relentless taskmaster whose methods bordered on cruelty. "He was brilliant," Curtis later said, "but he could cut you down to the bone if you weren't perfect." The most famous casualty of Wilder's perfectionism was Monroe. Biographers have recorded her chronic lateness, her forgotten lines, her fragile emotional state during the shoot. Yet Curtis and Lemmon remembered a darker reality, Wilder's fury simmering behind the camera, waiting to erupt. He demanded endless takes, sometimes more than 60 for a single line. He'd call her Miss Blah Blah when she couldn't remember dialogue, one crew member confessed. The laughter on screen was real, but the tears between takes were too. Curtis was not immune. During a crucial kissing scene with Monroe, he later joked bitterly that it was like kissing Hitler. The quip became legendary, splashed across gossip columns, but few noted the subtext. It wasn't just a jab at Monroe's unpredictability, it was a symptom of the toxic climate Wilder had fostered, where actors lashed out at each other rather than confront the man pulling the strings. "You didn't fight Billy," Curtis explained in an interview years later. "You survived him." The paradox was glaring. Wilder was shaping a comedy for the ages, a film whose every frame seemed drenched in joy, yet his methods relied on humiliation, intimidation, and emotional exhaustion. Monroe's lateness became the stuff of legend, but insiders whispered that much of her distress stemmed from the director's unyielding demands. Jack Lemmon, usually diplomatic, admitted years later that the atmosphere was like a war zone in silk gloves. The press, of course, told a different story. Headlines in 1959 gushed over Wilder's magical touch, praising his ability to wrangle such difficult stars into comedic harmony. Studio publicists spun tales of camaraderie, of laughter echoing long after the cameras stopped. But as one assistant director told a biographer decades later, there was laughter, yes, but it was nervous laughter, the kind you hear when people are scared. Curtis carried scars from the experience. Though he credited Wilder with directing one of his greatest performances, he never forgot the brutality behind the brilliance. He described the set as a place where no mistake was forgiven, no weakness overlooked. Even his co-star Monroe, adored by the world, was stripped of her humanity by Wilder's barbs. He wanted perfection, Curtis said, but he didn't care who broke along the way. It is tempting to dismiss these stories as the inevitable clash between genius and fragile stars. Yet that excuse crumbles under scrutiny. Genius does not require cruelty. Comedy does not demand humiliation. Wilder's legacy, like so many in Hollywood's golden age, forces us to ask, at what cost were these masterpieces made? When fans replay the famous last line, "Nobody's perfect," do they realize how bitterly true that was behind the scenes? Monroe would spiral further into addiction and despair, her confidence shattered. Curtis would spend decades haunted by the contradictions of that shoot, the laughter on screen, the torment off it. And Wilder, history remembers him as a titan, his Oscars gleaming, his name etched in stone. But for those who bore the brunt of his vision, the shine was tarnished with pain. Hero on screen, tyrant behind the camera, the genius who gave us joy by stealing it from others. And if millions still laugh at Some Like It Hot, maybe you should ask yourself, what ghosts hide inside that laughter? Otto Preminger, Smiles and Scars. If Billy Wilder was a tyrant wrapped in sophistication, Otto Preminger was tyranny itself, unvarnished and unapologetic. Born in Austria-Hungary and trained on the great stages of Vienna, Preminger brought with him to Hollywood an iron fist that no satin glove could conceal. His reputation spread across the industry, brilliant, daring, but merciless. He was the man who pushed boundaries with the man with the golden arm, 1955, and Anatomy of a Murder, 1959, yet his sets were whispered to be battlefields where only the strongest survived. Tony Curtis never worked directly under Preminger's command, but he didn't need to. His friends and colleagues did, and their stories filtered through Hollywood like dark folklore. Jean Seberg, the angelic face of Bonjour Tristesse, 1958, was one such casualty. Handpicked by Preminger at just 17, she was promised stardom, yet what awaited her was trauma. He treated her like a soldier, one co-star recalled. He screamed, he humiliated, he broke her down in front of everyone. Seberg later admitted that working with Preminger left her scarred, unable to trust directors again. Curtis, watching from the sidelines, remembered the whispers with unease. He had seen enough cruelty in Hollywood to know the difference between tough love and sadism, and Preminger's name always tilted toward the latter. Dorothy Dandridge, a trailblazer for black actresses, faced similar torment under his direction in Carmen Jones, 1954, and Porgy and Bess, 1959. The films were milestones, but the cost was her spirit. He would reduce her to tears, a friend later confessed. He believed pain created truth. The press, ever eager to canonize genius, described Preminger as demanding or eccentric. These were polite euphemisms for cruelty. Behind the glowing reviews of Anatomy of a Murder, where Jimmy Stewart gave one of his finest performances, lay the testimony of actors who described the set as a war zone. Stewart, seasoned and resilient, weathered it with professionalism, but others were not so fortunate. He didn't direct, one crew member muttered. He dominated. Hollywood adored the final product. Critics praised his fearlessness in confronting taboo subjects, rape, drug addiction, racism, subjects most studios wouldn't dare touch. But in tackling society's hypocrisies, Preminger revealed his own. He demanded freedom for his characters, but denied it to his actors. He broke barriers in film while breaking spirits in real life. Curtis, who had carved his own path through films like Sweet Smell of Success and Spartacus, could not ignore the dissonance. He remembered attending premieres where Preminger basked in applause, his smile wide, his voice booming with confidence. Yet Curtis also remembered the hollow looks of the actors who had worked under him. They clapped too, but their eyes betrayed something darker. "We were supposed to celebrate genius," Curtis remarked years later, but what we were really celebrating was survival. The contradiction was almost unbearable. Films remembered as milestones of liberation, made under the shadow of tyranny. When Seberg tried to build a career in France, some said she was running from Hollywood, from Preminger, from the demons his mentorship had planted in her. Her later struggles with mental health and her tragic death in 1979 at just. As the lights dim on his story, one question remains. When the curtain falls, should legends be remembered for the art they gave us or judged for the truths they concealed? The Golden Age gave us legends, but it also buried secrets in silence. Now that the curtain has been pulled back, the question is no longer about Billy Wilder, Otto Preminger, or even Tony Curtis. It is about how we remember them. Do we honor the films or confront the scars left behind them? Share what you believe. Should genius excuse cruelty, or should truth finally outweigh the myth? Because the next revelation may involve the idol you thought was untouchable. The silver screens of Hollywood once shimmered with a man whose presence seemed almost too perfect. Tony Curtis, the matinee idol, the heartthrob with eyes that promised both danger and charm. Audiences adored him, critics praised him, and directors bent scripts around his magnetic allure. He was the dream of an era when cinema promised escape. But behind that crafted image, the shadows told another story. Did you know that the same man who brought laughter in Some Like It Hot and heroism in Spartacus was whispered about in corridors not lit by stage lights, but by secrecy and silence? His fame burned like the California sun, yet it cast long, cold shadows behind him. Colleagues who once clinked champagne glasses in his honor later shivered at the memories of what they had seen. The paradox was haunting, adored by millions, yet feared by those who claimed to know him best. Hollywood's lights, once his allies, began to look away, as if ashamed to illuminate what lay beneath the glitter. The facade cracked, and from behind it, a darkness emerged. These were no longer roles from a script, but crimes that Hollywood had concealed for decades. And in the list, Tony Curtis revealed the final name is sure to send a chill down your spine. Tony Curtis was never just another actor, he was a phenomenon. Born Bernard Schwartz in the Bronx in 1925, he clawed his way out of poverty to become one of the brightest stars of Hollywood's golden age. With his jet-black hair, boyish grin, and the kind of charisma that could silence a crowded room, Curtis became the face of post-war American cinema. He was the rebel without apology, the lover every fan dreamed of, the man who seemed untouchable. By the 1950s, Curtis had already carved his place in history with films like The Sweet Smell of Success, 1957, where his slick portrayal of a desperate press agent earned him critical respect. 2 years later, his role in Some Like It Hot, 1959, alongside Marilyn Monroe, cemented him as a cultural icon. Critics compared his screen presence to Cary Grant, while fan magazines crowned him a king of Hollywood. One Life magazine profile called him the new golden boy, the closest thing to royalty America can manufacture. He was, in every sense, adored. But here lies the cruel irony. The higher the pedestal, the greater the fall. Behind the accolades and fan letters, the man himself carried scars and appetites that would one day tarnish his legacy. Colleagues often spoke of his ambition as relentless, a hunger so fierce it sometimes bordered on cruelty. Even his relationships were marked by turbulence. His marriage to Janet Leigh, hailed as one of Hollywood's golden unions, would crumble under infidelity and bitterness. And then came the whispers, stories that seemed unbelievable at first: abuse of power, manipulation of colleagues, acts of violence brushed aside by powerful studio executives. For years, those rumors remained buried under layers of Hollywood glamour, dismissed as the cost of genius. Yet, as time passed, pieces of the truth began to slip through the cracks. What makes these revelations so devastating is the dissonance. Here was a man who gave audiences laughter, charm, and tenderness on screen, yet behind closed doors, accounts describe someone capable of cruelty, control, and calculated malice. The myth of Tony Curtis, the dream that Hollywood sold, stood in stark contrast to the darker figure whispered about in private. And this contrast is what makes his inclusion on the list so shocking. It wasn't just a fall from grace. It was a revelation that shattered the very illusions Hollywood had built around him. Because if Tony Curtis, the Prince of Charm, could hide such darkness, then what else was concealed behind the velvet curtains of the Golden Age? That tension between light and shadow, myth and truth, set the stage for what would come next. The shocking cases, the voices of witnesses, and the crimes no longer hidden by the blinding glow of stardom. And if millions of fans once adored him, maybe you too feel the sting of betrayal in learning what lay behind the smile. The question that haunts Hollywood even now is simple. Who was Tony Curtis, really? Was he the charming hero who saved Janet Leigh from studio exploitation, or the man who destroyed her with betrayal? Was he the loyal friend who shared the screen with legends like Burt Lancaster, or the rival who left a trail of bitter colleagues? Behind every glowing magazine cover, there were murmurs. Extras spoke of tempers flaring when cameras stopped rolling. Studio assistants whispered of doors slammed, of tears hushed in dressing rooms. Some say the power he wielded was intoxicating, that he learned quickly how to use his fame as both a shield and a weapon. So the mystery deepened. Why did the industry, so quick to punish others, remain silent? What debts did Curtis call in? What secrets did he hold that kept him untouchable for so long? Fans watched his rise, oblivious, while insiders carried the weight of what they'd seen. Today we piece together the stories, shards of testimony, archived headlines, confessions long ignored. This isn't simply a tale of scandal, it's an investigation into how far Hollywood would go to protect its idols. The list of names and accusations doesn't just illuminate Curtis's character. It forces us to confront an era where applause often drowned out the cries of the vulnerable. And if the golden boy of the screen could harbor such shadows, who else was hiding in the darkness? That was only the surface. The real secret came later. At number 5, we begin with a story that cracked Curtis's shining mask. In 1960, while filming The Rat Race, Curtis was hailed in the press as a consummate professional, the actor who could lift even weak scripts with his charm. But behind the curtain, whispers grew louder. An assistant director later claimed Tony had two faces, the one he showed the camera and the one he showed when no one important was looking. Accounts described sudden bursts of rage, belittling of crew, and moments when Curtis treated colleagues like disposable props rather than collaborators. Headlines never reported it. Studios, desperate to keep his image polished, turned those outbursts into gossip footnotes. At number 4, Curtis's troubled personal life collided with his professional one. His marriage to Janet Leigh was Hollywood's fairy tale in the 1950s, two beautiful stars walking hand in hand through a world of glamour. Magazines called them the dream couple, but the truth was darker. Leigh herself would later describe the marriage as suffocating, marked by Curtis's infidelity and manipulation. Biographer Lawrence Quirk noted, he loved the adoration, but struggled to give love back. When the cracks showed, Hollywood spun the story into a romantic tragedy. What fans didn't see were the nights of slammed doors, whispered accusations, and the cold silence that lingered long after the spotlight faded. At number 3, Curtis's addiction issues revealed another layer of darkness. In later years, he openly admitted to abusing alcohol and drugs, but insiders suggest the spiral began much earlier. A production assistant on Sweet Smell of Success recalled, "You could see it even then. His eyes would glaze, his temper would snap, and the room would shift from laughter to fear in seconds." Addiction was the excuse given in later interviews, but for those who endured it, the pain was real. Hollywood's system of silence protected him, as producers quietly covered delays, rewrote schedules, and paid off gossip columnists. At number 2, Curtis's darker appetites emerged in accounts from colleagues who dared to speak. Actress Christine Kaufman, his later wife, described their relationship as both intoxicating and destructive. Though she often defended him publicly, friends claimed she confided in private about the volatility of his temper. Journalist Charles Hyam once wrote, "Curtis lived in extremes, lavish generosity one day, cruel indifference the next." It was this duality that made him magnetic on-screen, but unbearable off it. The Hollywood press machine polished every sharp edge, but insiders carried the bruises of those hidden storms. And finally, at number 1, the chilling truth that sealed his place on the list. For decades, Curtis maintained the image of a man who conquered adversity, who symbolized the American dream. Yet as time passed, more stories emerged of colleagues silenced, careers ruined, and relationships scarred. It wasn't one scandal, but the pattern of power used carelessly, of charm turned into a weapon that redefined his legacy. The same smile that melted audiences could behind closed doors, freeze a room into silence. Hero on screen, villain off it, idol, monster, Tony Curtis embodied them all. Fans still whisper about the man he really was, and if you've heard it, you know why. The list of sins and betrayals might feel like gossip, but what does it really reveal about Tony Curtis and about Hollywood itself? On one hand, Curtis was undeniably gifted, a boy from the Bronx who transformed himself into a global icon. His journey embodied the dream that America told itself in the mid-20th century: rise from nothing, conquer the world, live forever on celluloid. Yet the revelations about his cruelty and manipulation remind us that fame does not purify, it amplifies. The charm that won him roles became a mask for darker impulses. The ambition that carried him from poverty to palaces also fed a relentless hunger that left others wounded in its path. What's striking is how Curtis's story mirrors the very industry that birthed him. Hollywood has always thrived on duality, glamour wrapped around secrets, applause hiding screams. In many ways, Curtis was Hollywood personified. His public image was glittering, heroic, and seductive, while his private reality was effort.